I think I have heard grooming described every way under the sun. When you say the term grooming, can you describe exactly what you're talking about, the definition that you use?
What we did is we looked at the research that existed, which was largely kind of descriptive and case study based, and we identified it kind of as a process. It's primarily described as the behaviors that a perpetrator engages in before the abuse happens so that they can kind of gain access to the child and perpetrate the abuse without detection or having the child disclose. We then went further to kind of develop a stage model, which we call the sexual grooming model. And we identified 5 different stages. The first being victim selection, where the perpetrator selects somebody who is vulnerable, either because of psychological reasons, they might be lonely or isolated or have psychological or behavioral problems, or because of environmental circumstances, like they don't have adequate supervision or their parents aren't resources for them. They then gain access to them and isolate them. And so depending upon the nature of the perpetrator, that might be, working in a youth serving organization, it may be volunteering someplace, or if it's a family member or somebody, close to the family, they already have access, so that's a little less necessary. But then they might isolate them psychologically or physically from their family and friends. We then see that they gain trust with the child and those around them. And that's kind of the crux of the grooming process, is this relationship formation. And that's often what prevents the disclosure. Because they select kids who are potentially vulnerable, they give them love and attention and affection, and they find out what they need and they give it to them. And so this relationship becomes somewhat kind of important to the child. And so this becomes an important person in their lives. They also gain the trust of family members, potentially the community as a whole. And then the final stage before the abuse happens is the desensitization to sexual content and physical contact. And that's when they start to have those boundary violations, where they start to kind of, use sexual language. They start touching the child in non-sexual ways like hugs, but then it kind of progresses to more and more frequent touches. The boundary gets crossed without the child necessarily recognizing that it's happened until it's too late. And then the final stage we call post-abuse maintenance. So once the abuse has happened, the perpetrator generally either wants to be undetected or wants to continue the abuse. And so then they use different strategies to prevent the child from telling, kind of explaining that, this is something they wanted. This is how people show love, that nobody would believe them if they told. Some people might use threats, or they threaten to abandon them, or they would lose the relationship, or they use bribes or threats.